Good morning. This is Dr. Lenny Thyme, and you're listening to The New Way on Steempunk Radio. It's Tuesday morning, September 11th, and September 11th is a magic day in most of the world. It is a day that has been intercepted because of the number of times that things have happened out of whack on the 11th of September in various different years. Today I have a guest, Karen the social worker, who on September 11th, 2001, took part in the proceedings of the day as a social worker and was called on to counsel people who were directly affected from what happened on that day. As we all remember, there were a couple of towers in New York City that came to the ground, but there was a lot more at play that day. Welcome to the New Way again, Karen.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Lenny. I appreciate the fact that you're focusing on 9/11, and the New Way is a perfect platform for that because after 17 years, I think it's more than time to weigh what we knew and rethink what it is that we really know on that day. So this year, every year I reflect on my journal, and this year is different because I never have reflected on my journal on this day, looking at contrasting and comparing what I knew then versus what I know now.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult thing to place yourself back in time, but we seem to do it year after year on this date. And for me, in 2001, I was working as a consultant in the area of chemistry, and we were doing something that is called carbon accounting. And the carbon accounting had to do with going out and measuring the types of trees on the land. And we had roughly 1,000 acres of land that we were counting the carbon on. And so we made some plots that were less than an acre, but they were created in ways that were specified in a protocol. And we then took tape measures and surrounded the tree and measured the diameter of the tree at breast height, used a reloscope to estimate the height of the tree, and was able to count the carbon amount in all of the trees in our specific plot. We did that 13 times and had 13 different plots of different types of trees on the land, and we'd average that to develop an algorithm that measured the amount of carbon on the land. And the company that was going to bank our carbon with us was a company called Cantor Fitzgerald, located on the 98th floor. I think it had 4 or 5 floors of Trade Tower number 1. And so when the trade tower came down, I lost a really good friend and colleague there and several other people that I had talked to on the phone. And there was no warning that things were going to be down. I wasn't in contact with them on that day, but I had been in contact the previous day, and it was sort of like a shell shock for me. But I was in Oregon and way far away from the scene of the events, and I pretty much didn't have the attachment that a lot of people did have. But you were in...
Can I interrupt for
Yes,
1
please
second,
do.
Dr. Lenny?
Please do.
It was at this exact moment, 17 years ago, that Flight 93 allegedly, crashed into southeast area of Pennsylvania in Somerset County. And I just wondered if we could just take a 30-second moment to reflect. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to give a shout out to those that were on Flight 93, given that It crashed Eastern Standard Time, 10:03.
And
continue. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Flight 93 was the flight that ran through Pennsylvania and was going in a western area when it happened? Western direction?
Based on the reports, it was headed west towards Cleveland and made a turnabout. And while everyone was very focused on the crashes into the towers in the Pentagon, there was this one remaining flight. And it just being local to Pittsburgh at that time, I even years later spoke to an aircraft or airport employee who said that he was ordered from Incident Command to get down from the watchtower, which is odd because if there was a flight that's unaccounted for, wouldn't you want your lookout man to be on the tower looking out? It just, everything's, hindsight's 20/20, they say, but I wish that I had actually recorded his name and kept it. I have a box of memorabilia, photos and things that I took because I was also involved in the year anniversary, attending, just providing grief support and things like that. And just over the years, I have had these just one-on-one encounters, just as doing my work as a social worker. And I wish I had kept a diary through all of these years where 11 months go by and all of a sudden I talk to somebody. And if I could lace all of that data, but for everything past 9/11, I have to just recollect from my memory. But I remember him saying he didn't understand why he was ordered down from the watchtower at the Pittsburgh International Airport.
No, it didn't make sense. A lot of the things that went on in that day, it was like the playbook was there, but now that the action was in play, the playbook wasn't following the action as the action had been told to everyone. And the idea that certain people were ordered to stand down and other people were ordered to do things that were quite contrary to regular protocol. There was even a war game taking place in the air around Washington, D.C. on 9/11/2001. And so the regular airplanes that would have been there to scramble and go after jets were already taken off and put on another mission that had to do with nothing more than somebody playing games. So I'd like you to describe your day on the 11th of September. Where did you start from? Were you in Pittsburgh proper? Did you get called to an airport? Why don't you walk us through what happened on the day you recall?
Sure. I woke up in my home. I was employed as level 1 trauma emergency room social worker. I have unconventional shifts. I worked the overnights, basically 4 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, overnight. So Monday, Tuesday is kind of like my weekend. And the phone kept ringing, and it was my mother, who was still alive at the time. And when I played the message, she was like, "Oh my God, Karen, pick up!" She's very hysterical. And she's like, "I don't know what's going on in the world. The whole world's crazy. Turn on the TV." She said, "New York City's been hit. The buildings have been hit. Oh my God, where are you, Karen Lynn? Oh my God, you got to call me as soon as you get this message." And so obviously that kind of message, I just turned on the TV, and I just remember just kind of being like a deer stunned and highlight, like, or what do they call it? Spotlights or headlights. And I just knew that what I was looking at was big. I actually called in to my hospital because I was a member on a critical incident stress management team that was for the hospital, also citywide for Pittsburgh, for critical incidents. And I had worked critical incidents before, things like kindergartner who died from an asthma attack and having to debrief the classroom of kindergartners. dealing with that grief. Never, ever when I got certified in critical incident stress management and took interest in this line of work did I ever think something of this magnitude would ever be in the trajectory of my career. So, but naturally, I just called, and my boss, Karen, also named Karen, she indicated, could you please come down? We're having a meeting, and we're discussing how we're going to, deploy or replace people. So I came down, and it was really bizarro because there were literally like newspaper boys on the street corner going extra, read all about it. I was like, what is this? Is this like 1918? It just, that's not a vision that anybody in my Generation X would have seen at any time. It more or less was something familiar in movies or documentaries when you saw extra, read out about it, the Titanic crashed, that kind of stuff. So it was very surreal. But it ended up that I think about a team of 5 of us were assigned to go to Somerset, which is not too far away, like an hour and 15 minutes from Pittsburgh. And we headed that way and stayed there for about a week.
Wow. And so when you get out to a place, Somerset is a fairly rural town in western central Pennsylvania. It's got, maybe a couple thousand people?
Well, southern western. It has more people than that. Somerset County is the county.
Okay.
Shanksville is the name of the little town that's in Somerset County. And the majority of my work ended up being with first responders from Somerset County that were all immediately on scene to provide aid in whatever capacity. And then a lot of the work was done with this school. It was a small school, so small that it housed kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade. And it was less than 1 mile from the impact of whatever crashed into the ground. And the whole building, from their testimonies, the whole building shook. And there was a lot of grief among the teachers because in that situation, they don't know what's going on. Many of them, young Generation Xers, hadn't ever gone through drills of that such things like my parents did when they were growing up. But based
duck and cover really helped, didn't it?
What was that?
Duck and cover really helped, crawling under desks in a classroom. Those were the drills we had.
Yeah, well, that's what many of them just automatically, instinctively jump to. Again, going to media, it's amazing how media shapes even our first automatic response in a situation that you're not even prepared for. And they don't know what the heck's going on, but what they do know is that they have to delay their response because they're responsible for how many, children are in their classroom. And so the best thing they could think to do, and they don't even know if it's a safe thing to do or the right thing to do or the most protective thing to do, was everybody just cover your head and get under your desks. But the whole time, meanwhile, the one teacher I remember, and this is in my journal, when I actually ended up doing an individual debriefing with her because, as you know, the air flight space was closed down and her husband was stuck on the West Coast. He couldn't get back, and she's pregnant with their child.
This is movie drama. We can write all about this and film it. I'm sure they have.
It doesn't get any real, but so for her, and she happened to be in charge of the kindergarten class. And for her, the fact that she delayed worrying about her husband being down in California, the fact that 2 of the planes were actually destined for California, these are all automatic thoughts going through her head that are just enhancing that sense of danger. The fact that she's pregnant with their first child, worrying, oh my God, am I going to be a single mother? She had to put all of those automatic thoughts aside because she had the lives of young 5-6-year-olds that she had to, and she did an excellent job for not having any how-to training on this. She did an excellent job. But I can understand, it was probably 3 or 4 days out of a 7-day stint there, that she just had a freaking breakdown, and rightfully so. And but what strains about all the employees and the children at Shanksville that day, they weren't getting any information. They were told to stay in the building, and kids couldn't get in touch with their parents. Parents couldn't get in touch with the kids. Phone lines were down, and they pretty much were left to just guess. Well, the rest of the world
artificially created terror, because it would be pretty scary if nobody was giving you information and you heard big booms and then all of a sudden everything's silent, everything's normal. Did they not put on television in the classrooms?
They didn't have the information. I think the power was affected, and I think there was a main phone line. I didn't detail about the phones as much, but I remember that there were too many, like a whole school wanting to call their moms and dads. I mean, that's a little chaotic, right? Using one phone line. And this was before, the time where everybody had cell phones and things like that. I mean, there were a lot of cell phones, but not where there was. I mean, nowadays, pretty much everybody has a cell phone on their body at any time. It wasn't like that on that day. So, and it's interesting because one of the focus of the work was talking about the different developmental stages and how, early childhood versus middle childhood versus, pre-teen adolescent childhood, how they respond to such a thing. And one of the vignettes, and it was very disturbing, and I remember teachers and the administrators being very angry in typical normal adolescent jest. At one point, when they did find out that it was reportedly a plane, one of the kids, teenage kids, joked that, whatever kid, John Doe, did you hear the plane hit your house, your parents are dead. So you take what goes on in high school and middle school on an everyday basis, and you have a tragedy like this, and oh my gosh, and you mix the two, it's...
High school students are probably the best folks to respond to something like that in comedic fashion, because they're used to seeing that on television and movies and other things, and it doesn't faze them so much. So the wit required to keep up in high school is one where, excuse me, people who had it really had it. But for a kid to make a joke like that at a time like that, it seems like irony. There's no way he could have known the importance of the situation and the gravity. And yet to make that sort of joke is really an important thing in the health and well-being of everybody who was there, because breaking the mood with a joke, even if it's a bad, sick joke, just changes everybody's attitude and lets them breathe again. And when you don't know what's going on, it becomes difficult to breathe.
Well, absolutely. And the other same age peers, typical fashion. You had mentioned one of your favorite theorists was Margaret Muller. It's completely textbook Margaret Muller, adolescent stage development. So on one side of the coin, it basically appropriate, but so inappropriate. But in the moment, the other kids laughed, thought it was funny, joined in, and all these adults, because that's a time where adults don't know anything. We're nerdies. We're not hip. We're not, we're not cool, right?
Right.
So that was the dynamic of the teens in the school, that they're like, oh yeah, like we're gonna walk out and the town's not gonna be there anymore. So not even recognize the magnitude of the whole situation. So obviously, the point of intervention of the team of debriefers I was working with was helping them recognize, okay, you get the seriousness of the situation, right? But trust me, when this adolescent processes what's going on, their own reflection and guilt of what they did is going to be punishing them. And it's okay to correct, but the level of anger, and especially because it was a school from K to 12, the potential for this cynicism to reach the lower grades and whatnot was also concerning. So it was interesting because there was a lot of anger towards what is really considered typical adolescent behavior. That had to be diffused and lightened up in order to, once they got back to school, integrate that experience in a way that wasn't going to help the person. And that's all what debriefing is.
So
helping to review what happened so that moving forward you can integrate it in your psyche in a way that you're not forever spooked by, triggers and flashbacks.
yeah, in a way,
integrate it safely.
in a way, the adolescents at the high school responded to the event quite a bit differently than the adults, and were able to bring in, maybe it was levity for the kid, but the adults freaked out. But the adult behavior was anything but calm and reinforcing. When it happened, everybody reacted different, and I did not react as most people did. I just was sort of stunned and went around and spent my day doing what I normally do, because I was not into television and I was not going to get dragged into watching the scene be reported as it happened. But there are a number of things that I can look back to that just in the common sense don't make any common sense as to what actually went on. And so in trying to make sense of something that really didn't make sense, the media wasn't helpful at all. But back at the school in Pennsylvania how long did it take before they finally got information on what was happening, and how close was the information to anything realistic?
They finally sent the kids home. The parents actually had to come and pick them up. I remember there were a couple of situations where parents were either stuck at their job or something, and so they aimed to get them home. They finally, I think, got them all home by 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But then once they got home, they were in the loving care of their parents. The teachers were finally in a situation where they could react personally as opposed to being protector of the students. And so they had almost like a delayed response. How they would have responded if they weren't in charge of X amount of children, that was delayed until later on in the day. So the aftermath was pretty intense emotionally for the days following. What was interesting was when we set up kind of like a mental health command at the Somerset County MHMR, which MR is dated terminology. Now it's intellectual developmental delay. But at the time it's called MHMR, and oh my gosh, loved all the mental health professionals there. They were so cool. but they too had to delay their response because where is everybody going to go but to the Somerset County Mental Health memoir for like questions, concerns, crisis line. And so they too had to delay their response. And I remember my boss, Karen Gano, she facilitated the debriefing session, participated by those first kind of like mental health aid debriefers, so that they had a chance to walk through what they were thinking, feeling, and just integrate it so that they were then in a position where they could better serve, because they're part of that community. They're there long term to help in weeks, months, even years after this incident. They were awesome, lovely people. But we found while we were there planning how to optimize debriefing and just quelling the nerves and the angst of the greater community, that superintendent of the school district put a shutdown. There was to be no discussion at all about 9/11, Flight 93, the crash, the site, nothing. And that any student that tried to talk about it would go to the principal's office, and any employee that broached or entertained the subject or tried to introduce the subject would also be reported and be given a warning. And when I look back at my journal and I look at the writings and how I actually ended up preparing the material, because I went on to do several continuing education seminars for social workers that wanting to gain information and insight into how they too could work in disaster scenes and things, and what skills we use and how they're applied in a scene like that. I would say, compare and contrast. And can you hold that thought for just a second? I again just want to indicate that at this time, 10:28 Eastern Time, the North Tower of World Trade Center collapsed. So if we can just have another 30-second pause.
Certainly.
To just think about the first responders and the people in that building and just pray for their souls. Thank you for that. But, Lenny, where was I?
You were talking about the time-delayed response, the shutdown of discussion by the superintendent of the schools.
Right. So when they went back to school after the weekend, or no, I guess we were anticipating the weekend. It had it been on that
It
Friday.
was a Tuesday. Did they continue school Wednesday and Thursday, or were there a few days off from school?
There was a few days off. And so the big plan was, let's prepare all the teachers and the staff for when school resumes. And when I looked at my material and I looked at clinical journals on coping with catastrophe and looking at theoretical frameworks, one of the things that I encountered in many of the books that I had researched in preparing for my continuing education, where I was the presenter for continuing ed social work skills, one of the things that I snagged onto was rural versus metropolitan ideas and values in terms of how they would respond. And so I kind of ran on that theory, and having also gone for 6 weeks to ground zero in New York City, I was in a place to compare and contrast. And so that shutdown I interpreted as the rural area helping their own and just not being open to psychology. And I don't even want to say psychology, because this isn't psychology. It's natural, normal human behavior responding to incredibly abnormal situation. There's nothing crazy. I mean, there's no wrong response, no right response. It is what it is. And so, but years later, everything that I've studied, and I will be posting a lot of links to my key sources of information that I have indulged in over the years, but coming to the conclusion that what hit the ground, at least at that spot within 1 mile from the school, it was not a plane. I mean, I actually have a picture that I took from the top of the hill. It was not a plane. It didn't even remotely resemble the plane that crashed in Hopewell, that has, to this day, had the longest length of investigation by the NSTB. And there were no plane parts. There were no big pieces of metal. All there was a big crater with steam coming out of it. And
there was some other problems.
At any rate, now I reflect and I say that wasn't a rural attitude. That was a command from some power that should not be, suppressing information, because early on there were coverage of people that were driving saying that, yeah, it looked kind of like a plane, but it didn't have windows like a plane. It didn't have it didn't have, the numbers or that kind of stuff. And so where in the community does information get shared and passed along? School, kids come home, they tell their mom. It was the suppression so that the official story could be reported early on. It had nothing to do with rural counties and school districts not being open to. So go ahead.
There's some real significant problems with other pieces of the whole 911 story. And the fact that the rumor was that there was no plane involved in Pennsylvania was certainly out there. There's also rumor that what hit the Pentagon was not a plane. And that one seems to be a fairly solid rumor also. And the biggest problem that I have with the whole 9/11 is building number 7, the one that came down 10 minutes after the person from England reported that it was already down and had it in the background of her report as standing. So
Mary Silverstein said, there's already been such a great loss of life. Let's just go ahead and pull it. That was a big giveaway too.
Yeah, there's a worker named Michael Rupert who wrote Crossing the Rubicon, and he's not alive any longer, but he did some really, really in-depth work to explain 911, and the base story that he came up with is the operating story that I carry, but the information that you're passing along today is new information to me. And having grown up in an urban area and moved to my adult life in a rural area, there are some interplays of what you're talking about that have a sense of real different motivations between people. But I agree with you in that the superintendent forcefully enacting the shutdown of all cross information was to keep control of portions of the story that never quite jived with the media release of what had happened and the pictures that we were shown, but we weren't on site. You were there and dealing with folks in the midst of a tragedy. So please continue and tell us about how the response to the principal's edict or superintendent's edict was actually enforced and how it worked.
Well, when we were collaborating with the Somerset MHMR professionals, again, they're the salt of the earth. Oh my gosh, I love those people. We decided, well, what if we came up with a workaround? Let's use the emergency room the emergency room, and having worked the emergency room myself, there's bound to be people that are going to come in with symptoms of panic attacks, other things, increased drinking to cope with confusion, the fog of war, that kind of stuff. And let's make a flyer that that can be passed out at the hospital to say over the weekend. I don't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday. I think it was Saturday. We put it all together pretty quickly, and we got in touch. We divvied up tasks, and somebody was in charge of getting in touch with the local radio to announce it on radio, saying, so we're bypassing the school, and this is a time for the community to come together. And we used a local church for doing that. It was interesting because there was mixed thoughts and understanding the human psyche, and when you're in the fog of war, there's some people that are just blindly in doctrine, and they say, well, if the superintendent ordered it, then there must be a really good reason. And I trust the superintendent is looking out for our best interest. There were other people that they're saying, like, the officials here are not being honest with us, and when you look at rural, people know their land. They know their land, and they know the people in their land. And so, more so than probably any other site, and I didn't work Pentagon, but my sister was living in Arlington in a high-rise apartment that is less than a mile. I mean, it's literally maybe like 0.6 miles from that scene. The fumes, they had to evacuate that building because of the inhalation of smoke and fire. I don't know what to make of this. She said that there was some kind of debris on the rooftop, as many people that were from the building were looking at it. My cousin was actually stuck in traffic on the belt. I think it's the GW Parkway. It goes right past. And She said there was a plane so low, but it didn't look like a plane. But it was really, really low, and like literally she was ducking in her car, looking through a windshield to say, what the hell is that? So that's the closest, detail I have about that. As to what went in there, I don't know. I wasn't there working and listening to first-hand stories. I just know what my sister had on her rooftop, and I just know what my cousin Jessica, she said that isn't a plane. It doesn't have passenger windows. And so that's all I have to go on for that site. But I think what happened in Shanksville and the surrounding area, because they're a small community, they probably had the earliest signs of doubt.
I would agree. I would think that somebody who knew what was coming down got into the area, potentially with the team of people that you were with, or were there other people who got into the area? But somebody debriefed that superintendent and read him the riot act of what he had to do to fix this problem he had. And the man himself probably was deep enough into what was going on that he was a good soldier taking orders. A lot of what we see in the world today can't be categorized in black and white terms, but if everything is forced to be categorized in black or white terms, the dark versus the light battle has been going on forever, and it's not like it just started last year between the Republicans and the Democrats. This has been going on for time persistent, and whoever controls the information has a strategic advantage of how it goes. And when there's no information to control and the story is developing, there are people who immediately try and control that narrative. And so the principle shutting down the cross-discussion of the narrative was absolutely necessary for the bigger picture to obfuscate the situation and convince people that we were attacked by terrorist organizations. And the reality is that the day before this all happened, somebody found out that the Pentagon had mysteriously lost, what was it, $8 billion, and grilled Donald Rumsfeld on the floor of the House of Representatives. And then miraculously, this happened the very next day, and all bets were off on holding the Pentagon's feet responsible for the missing money. Flash to today, and we know there's a lot more behind that story. And what are they up to? 51,000 indictments sealed right now? So
a lot.
We're going to get the real story, and this is just the beginning of how we bring things out.
Oh, absolutely. What's interesting is the community event, which was meant to kind of, a workaround, or, okay, well, if plan A doesn't work, let's work on plan B. And it was initially intended that, like, when we were brainstorming, it was intended to break out into small debriefing groups. And we had a number of people from Somerset Mental Health, as well as people from the Pittsburgh Critical Incident Stress Debriefing Team. And it was meant to be an opportunity to do exactly what you do in debriefing, which is review what your automatic thought was. There's a whole model of how you do a debriefing. But anyway, the whole purpose of doing it is to help people integrate what happened in a healthful way that minimizes the risk of PTSD or long-term PTSD. But it's interesting how when the event unfolded, it turned more into singing hymns and saying prayers, and nothing to prompt either individual one-on-one kind of debriefing or group debriefings. It was more like the community coming together in spirit, singing Kumbaya.
Okay.
So the initial vision, and I don't have the 30,000-foot view on that, so I don't know who was in a position, but it unrolled differently than how it was initially envisioned. And I don't know how or who, but again, I'm going to say these people, like, they know each other. The coroner for Somerset County, he's a citizen. It's a small town. People are going to say, "Hello, man," blah, blah, blah. And what do you think he's going to say? It's like, "Oh man, they're assuming." Right? Cold storage is probably packed right now. Nope.
Yeah.
No bodies have been found. No body parts have been found. Well, isn't that interesting? So what do you think in a small town? Well, I mean, they know each other. They live next to each other. They know each other's names. They say hello to each other in the restaurant or the grocery store. Everybody knows who the town coroner is. Everybody knows who they know who they
And nobody's missing. Nobody on the ground is missing. Nobody from local area got hurt in the incident at all, right?
Yeah, nobody. Mm-mm.
So everybody's there. Nobody has good information. The coroner, the police chief, the superintendent of the school, and a couple of other people, the mayor, might have better information, but people from outside are trying to get information inside and get information from inside that the insiders don't really have because they didn't know what was going on, because this just dropped out of the sky, right?
It dropped out of the sky, and what you have is where in New York City, you don't even know your neighbor. When I lived there, I didn't know the neighbors that lived on my floor. I didn't have camaraderie with them. You walk down the street, and pretty much everybody's a stranger. But that's part of the energy pool and things like that. In a small town, everybody knows each other. And so there's experience there. There's history there. Well, I mean, Lenny, Dr. Lenny, I'm going to ask you, for people that you've known for a long time, you have a history with, don't you tend to lend credibility to what they're saying?
Well, it works both ways. Not only do I tend to know credible sources, I know exactly who's not credible when they're telling me something that I know is total BS. because I either know the backstory or know some of the other people involved. And because I've lived in the same location for over 30 years in a rural community, the fact that I lived in one home for 20 years, was a participating member of everything, and then had to leave, and now I've been back for almost 3.5 years, and nobody knows I'm around. Yes, I have my sources that I can go to and find out things that'll give me total, complete, truthful in their opinion versions of things. And so when I run into somebody who tells me a story, invariably from the location where the story went on, I can always find out the real story behind it. So we're talking about people who by day 2 or 3 could be putting together the real story if they had the information. What day of the process did the superintendent cut off the discussion? Was that day 2?
It was like day 3. It would have been like the 13th. And so here's interesting. 1 year later, I went back. They were calling for people to help with the 1-year anniversary. I went back. I had the lovely experience of kind of shadowing. At the time, I was trying to get into pet therapy and using like healing dogs and things like that, which are so great. Oh my God, the greatest dog named Star. And it's amazing how dogs are just such a wonderful dynamic to a conversation. And interestingly, when you made rounds from people that came from out of town for the memorial versus the actual townspeople, there was anger among the people that actually lived there.
Yeah.
Anger about being lied to.
Absolutely.
I don't know why, but such and such is not telling the whole story, and I've known him my whole life, and I can't think of the life of me of why he's not being forthcoming. There was a lot of anger towards one woman, and I don't remember or know her name, but I don't know whether she was paid money, but basically she was posed on the media as a local that her eye testimony of what she saw in the air was verbatim, like fit the narrative that was told to us. There was a lot of anger about that. So what I could tell, not living in that area for that entire year, but coming back 1 year later on the anniversary, just to provide support and whatnot, it was very interesting how there was a stark contrast between people people traveled all over the world. There was all the family members of the passengers on Flight 93. There was the wife of the pilot. There were all these people. But they're, at the core of this is still the townspeople. And such different presentation of thoughts, emotions, behavior, comparing the locals versus those visiting the town to see the erected memorial to
right.
passengers of Flight 93. I mean, market difference. Now, at the time, clinical social worker here, I'm just thinking, they're just having, this is part of their process.
Right. There's a problem I have in that, too.
Last time, 1050, this time 17 years ago, 5 stories of the Pentagon collapsed due to the fire. Just want to take 30 seconds to just put our thoughts, praying and hoping that truth will be revealed in its entirety. Thank you. And that, I promise there won't be any more reflections.
How many?
You know how I am, Dr. Lenny.
Yeah.
I'm a mother hen, and I'm very protective of people and their sorrow, and I don't want to in any way minimize or overlook the tragedy of loss from that day. So thank you for entertaining me to have 3 reflections.
How many events that take place in history have the potential of varying in how they happened on different timelines? If 911 is a marker of the timeline that we were on at that time, and another timeline was created where that was avoided, then the timeline where that was avoided would take a completely different format. But when timelines take different formats and later events cause them to have the same future outcomes that they would have anyway, the timeline isn't really affected and things start blurring and merging. And what I think might be happening with Mandela effects is the convergence of timelines to a point where there's going to be a unity timeline has to combine different events from different time-space coordinates on Earth to be under the same time-space coordinates, because the people here all believe they're playing in the same frame of reference as far as time goes. So that's just an aside. I want to get back to on topic. It seems to me that day 1, day 2, day 3 each had different flavors amongst the trust in the community. And by the time day 3 came with a superintendent edict that we're not going to talk about this anymore, there's too much speculation, nobody knows what they're talking about, everybody needs to shut up. And the fact that a year later there's one woman who is chastised by everybody, probably because she didn't shut up, and she probably got paid by some sleazy media outlet to provide that footage. And so people perceived she made a profit from it. She said, well, fuck you, this is America, I can do whatever I want. And you can see the split between individual people happen because of the perception of events in different perspective.
Absolutely. Like I said, I mean, I've never looked back at my journals before with, I've always looked back at my journals with remembrance and just like, oh yeah, I remember being told that, I remember being told that. But I've never looked back and contrast the in the now then versus the who I am in the now, given, I mean, I've had to literally put thousands of hours into this.
Right.
To the research, reaching out to people, volunteer for,
It's not over yet. You're going to put more.
For 911, I mean, I built databases. I can't even tell you how much volunteer I've done for people, for activists. I've done a lot.
You've done it for you. And people.
I think I've done it for other people, Dr. Lenny.
Yes.
Because
you have. It's because that's who you are. And it had to be done, and you stepped into the role.
Even if people that I worked with aren't ready to hear the truth, just like yesterday when they talked about 3D, 4D, 5D, everybody's on their own journey, their own timeline. But the least I can do is study it, get to the bottom of it, literally. And I don't just accept what I watch or what I read. I always look for contradiction. I've actually reached out, been in contact via email, even telephone, with people that aren't even from this country, people that have been, and I will say, talk to me. This is an area of interest. I've done what I can to help support organizations like, what is it? It's Architects and Engineer for 9/11 Truth, so that they can continue to do their fine work. And I was like, even if I'm doing gopher work, and that's what I did. I just build Excel databases of people to outreach that are actual members of various professional groups and whatnot across all the universities in the nation. And the more information I take the information, I discern it using rational deduction, I mean, you said something yesterday that you have a flux box.
Yes.
Sometimes I would come across stuff that I'm like, yeah, I don't really know about this. It's in my in-between box. But then there were other things that I came across that when I got verification from the source that no, this was not hyped up, this is not changed, I can't, every time I just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
One piece of new information acts like a key and opens up 6 different locks of different things, and you suddenly realize that things are related and they can only be either or. And there's so many myriad of possibility to get down to either or that you forget that you're even working on it. But that one piece of information comes in, and now you've got a true-false answer, and the algorithm for true-false is an absolute worker. It works perfectly.
Right.
If true,
went back and forth. Like,
then
sometimes I would say, there's no way this is true. But then on a fresh day and a fresh head,
right,
I'd say, well, no, there's no way that this is not true.
It's Schrodinger's cat. As long as you don't really know.
Dr. Judy Wood, and let me hear from the horse's mouth instead of actually just taking this presentation that was done. Let me actually, that's the way social workers do research.
Who is Dr. Judy Wood?
Dr. Judy Wood is actually she's no longer a professor, but she was a professor in engineering at Clemson, which is my alma mater. That's where I graduated from college in liberal arts. So sometimes some of these science concepts can go over my head, and in those situations, in attempt to really understand them, that's even more important, where I have to reach out to authors on academic journals and things like that to really get a sense of understanding for the topic. But Dr. Judy Wood, you can look her up on YouTube. Dr. Judy Wood, professor in engineering, a very brilliant scientist, but she basically gives a lot of information about directed energy weapons, and she will map and go through at all the anomalies from the scene of Ground Zero and how they defy science. So one of the images that's very, very familiar to people is when World Trade Center 7 fell, or before it fell, all the windows were blown out, okay? And she, from a scientist, and Dr. Lenny, you can speak more to this than I can because I'm the psychosocial person, but she says, just look at your physics and your rule of nature. She said, what path does fire and smoke take? It takes the path of least resistance. And she goes, that being, why isn't this smoke coming out of the windows? Why is it literally circling, like almost like a hurricane shape? Why is it circling into a counterclockwise twirl? All it is just material that's disintegrating. It, like, literally, the particles are up in the air, and you see, and it's like, yeah, like somehow all of the smoke and the heat and the fire is all going from one side of the building to the other side of the building, completely bypassing, busted out windows, right? And it's all going into a spiral coming up. Well, she explains the directed energy weapons that she believes were used that prompted that kind of evacuation of smoke and fire. I'm not even going to try and explain what she knows in her science because I will do it a huge disservice.
Sure.
So I would encourage others, and again, on my Twitter today, I will post intermittently throughout the day. I will be posting some photos from my work, like frontline scene at both Shanksville and Ground Zero. I will also be posting links of my top favorite videos that I find to be credible sources of information. But Dr. Judy Wood is somebody I would love for you, Dr. Lenny, to have on the show to explain a little bit more. But what I found very interesting was her observation of the abandoned cars and fire trucks on the road that were demolished for all intents and purposes. They were demolished by the fall of World Trade Center. And there is very interesting anomalies of how things didn't completely melt. And she talks about how, I guess maybe there's some chemical, with under direct energy weapons, there's some chemical composition changes that would cause two things to actually like stick together, almost like they get fused as if they were, what's the word when you fuse things together?
Soldered?
Flash dance. And people, the main character, what did she do? She, I don't know if the word is solder. You use a blowtorch and you fuse things.
Well, yeah, you're just sort of welding.
Welding. There you go. See, again, disclaimer, I was a liberal arts major. Ask me anything you want about British literature. So, at any rate, and as she presents it, it's like, wow, that is crazy. And then, when she would compare and contrast, photos of fires that burnt a vehicle or a truck, and you look at the remnants after the fire is out versus the remnants of those vehicles up and down the streets of New York City. Yeah, there's a lot of anomalies, and I'm not a scientist. I can't explain those anomalies, but I can see visually with my eyes there's a difference, and I'd like an explanation.
I think that Judy Wood probably would agree, and she's looking for that explanation and going into places that most people don't even know exist, because when you're a scientist, there are channels to do research, just like when you're a sociologist, you go to the horse's mouth. And the horses tend to be the people you've collected over the years that actually have a feel for their topic, so that when you don't know what's going on, you can get them to explain in your language how it works in their vision, and you can then blend it into your vision. And one of the problems I can see that we're having is that the form of knowledge exchange we have in the world is told knowledge. And told knowledge is a lot different from experiential knowledge. And if you're there and doing it, you get a whole completely different perspective from the immersion in the situation than what you get from the outside looking in. So the role of the observer cannot be played by a person who is embedded in the process, because by being embedded in the process, you don't have an outside perspective. So what we're really doing is we're looking at an event that took place on a scale that shaped human consciousness enough that it threw off random action detectors weeks in advance, that people knew something was coming because there were correlations that didn't make sense but were going to happen. And it makes total sense that 911 happened in the timeline you and I experienced it in, but there's a lot of people who don't live on that timeline and who weren't born at the time when this happened. So it's a historical event, and by being taught different from what actually came down, there's two different stories in play, where one event that we experienced is what we're talking about, and a whole nother event that's created in the imaginations of people who weren't there and don't have the capacity of experience within the experiences they've had to rationalize what they believe, believing something that's been taught to them that's different from the reality that we actually live in. But that conceptual reality created by television, Hollywood, political system, economic system, education system, healthcare system is breaking down rapidly, and what we believe is exactly the way we're going to get it. If we agree to believe different things and can run with the idea that we don't know, and you can believe one thing and I can believe another thing, we can both continue to do our work with different beliefs until we come to that point of fact where we open the box and we can see the cat, and the cat is alive. So we now no longer can take anything based on the cat is dead assumption and go back and change it, because the cat, we have to go back and change the things that were made with the assumption that the cat is dead, because the cat is obviously not dead. But backing up to where those assumptions were made isn't a function of today's society at all. And that's why we need the new way. And the new way is just taking those things that we know for sure, and we're absolutely positive of because we were immersed in it and we know the facts, and then taking the history as it's been shaped to make it different from the facts to push the agenda and stop that agenda right dead in its tracks. Because that's what the truth movement and the New Age is about, is accepting the facts as truth, and we're not playing with the true reality. So when we have experience of an event where you were at ground, I guess it wasn't ground zero because that was New York, so we'll call it ground 3 because Washington can be ground 2. The events that took place on the ground and the reality of the difference in the story coming out of ground zero can almost be treated like layers of an onion, where as you go further out on the onion, you get further and further away from the truth and the reality. And unfortunately, our education system has taught us so much untruth and disreality that we have to go back into what we know and what we know really well and question the foundations of that knowledge. And when we get a formally assumed true that is now false, we have to go back to that base algorithm that says, if true, then true and false for the next step. But if false, next step has to be true. And to go back in time to get rid of the falses, to get the true, is stepping through history and finding out which different images have presented to us absolutely that we can't take as absolutes anymore because they're relative to the situation. And at this point, World War II fits that bill. But it also fits the bill for 1913 and the creation of the Federal Reserve, in 1850 and the Civil War and Lincoln's actions, and even the revolution that took place in America. If you look back at the actions of one Benjamin Franklin in the Civil or in the Revolutionary War, you'll find that he was working for the bankers and hedged his bets and played both sides of that game. And that no matter which way it worked out, Franklin was going to be in charge of something. So he gets to be a founding father, but you can bet if the American Revolution didn't work, he'd be in British history as one of the patriots there, because he was playing the game from a perspective where he was embedded in the times, but he also had the perspective of knowing what was going on in the world with the action. internet has made it so that everybody knows what's going on in the world with the action. And now we're at the point where we can ask our questions and really start to get some answers. And that's why conversations like this one are so darn important in figuring out what's real, what's not real, and how to go back to unreal events that we can see were false flags, but now start discharging in both the forward and back directions from what happened there, and start overlaying the reality that we have now over the reality that we have then. And we can see how much this has been played, because we're actually out far enough that we can look back without feeling that we can do anything to change the events that actually happened. But those people who believe in the history of what they've been taught and weren't there to participate in the actual events have a completely different worldview that would benefit from hearing what we're talking about.
And at that, I thought this would be a good time just to kind of hit some key points in my journal. And if at any time you have scientific insights to explain some of the things, I welcome it. One of the first entries I talked about, basically, when I did Ground Zero, I was there October through November for a period of 6 weeks briefing first responders. I was stationed at the Marriott, which was made into a makeshift oasis for first responders that were actually first responders, iron workers that were cutting up large pieces of iron and steel into smaller, more manageable parts, drivers, transporters that were transporting debris out to Staten Island. I mean, it was a whole, kind of mix. But to make sure all their needs were met, it was actually kind of cool. There were Lazy Boy recliners that were donated. There were game consoles for whatever gaming system was up at the time. Big TV
Atari.
screens so that during a rest they could watch, football game. Computer setups so that people could, email to their family. The number of families broken up by 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and we're talking about workers that are commuting from Long Island, Queens. It's 8 hours is not enough time by the time you get home, to unwind, still attend to your family like you would normally do, and then get back and to work on the site. But so this is interesting. I wrote about a lot of the firemen that I talked to today. Their most difficult memory that they're having to integrate is people jumping from the World Trade Center. One described it that they cracked like eggs when they hit the pavement. Now, in hindsight, going back to Dr. Judy Wood noticed that people through the windows were taking off their clothes. And again, I'm not scientist, directed energy weapon person, but she believes that there was some kind of radiation that was exposed that was making their skin hot. And when you listen to some of the transcripts of phone calls from people that were talking about how hot their skin was, it was more than just being hot in a fire. It was more like while they are in an increasingly hot environment that's very hot and undesirable, it felt like their skin was peeling off. And so and when she cross-referenced it with people that were in buildings caught on fire, she couldn't find any known history where, unless somebody took off a piece of clothing and used it and put it in water to put under a doorway crack at the bottom. But other than that, what you see on all of the different floors is people actually taking off their clothes. And so if you were going to, her big question, which gave me a big aha, she's like, if you're about to jump, why are you taking off your clothes? Good point. So that's just one, again, Dr. Judy Wood is your main point of contact as to what chemicals were in the environment creating some of the chief complaints that the people on those floors were having. And, I mean, that's a great question. One person had described that the people up in the windows looked like ants going back and forth, deciding whether to burn or whether to jump. And again, I'm going to refer to Dr. Judy Wood. She goes into explanation about what would be natural in terms of, well, there's nothing natural about the situation, but she basically compares and contrasts the actual human experience when they're in a hot, burning room. And you have to remember that these people were disoriented. They did not know what was going on. I actually talked to one firefighter. Well, he wasn't even a firefighter. He was more or less like an engineer technician who was on the top of the roof that day when it was hit. And he indicated that he was doing something to enhance like the communication signal that's on top of that building. And
which building was he on?
He was on, I think it was building 2.
Okay. So he was on the roof of building 2 and building 1 got hit?
Let me look because I skipped forward to a couple entries. Forgive me. He was, I think.
Yes.
I better go in chronological order because I don't want to waste time looking for stuff.
That's fine. Let's get back to the point.
Yeah. So to give you an idea of how strong the brotherhood is among firefighters, I spoke to a gentleman who 24 and a half years on the force. He was trapped under debris when number 7 collapsed. He couldn't breathe or see. He said several minutes to escape felt like a lifetime. He spent the night in the hospital, and when he got discharged, he went straight back to the site the next day to continue working, looking for lost brothers. Lots of people talked about being quote-unquote brain dead. I would say that's probably like shell shock. We've known about that for a long time. Lots of firefighters saying unable to get any more than 2 hours of sleep at any one time. Lots of flashbacks and just very, very, very moated, trying to look for spots to dig to find more remains. At the time I was there, they were noticing that every time they turned over a staircase, that would actually be where they found civilians and their lost brothers. One firefighter said he felt like he was going to drive off the road when he was charged with driving an ambulance with body remains in it over to Staten Island.
Wow.
I won't share some of the gorier things that I was told.
It's one of those things that when you're a person and you're dealing with the horrors that you normally only see in the movies, and now those horrors are real, it's one of those things that you wonder if the movies weren't set up to implant the idea of the horror so that when they really pulled it off, you'd have some people who've already thought it through about what they would do because they saw it in a horror show.
Right. Well, and who could ever expect to actually see that live and in real time? Now, this is interesting. I actually had several people recall and describe, and it's helpful for them to describe to an unbiased, non-judgmental listener who will allow them to actually process what visually they see on their head. So another worker I was talking to also talked about the force of the plane explosion, or quote-unquote plane explosion, was so extreme that it lodged body parts of people inside the World Trade Center. Their body parts were actually lodged and fused into the brick and mortar structure of buildings across the street. And now, I'm not a scientist, but this is a question that if we ever get Dr. Judy Wood on your show, I would be interested in her explaining that, because there are a lot of anomalies about what we know about physics and how the force of impact versus what all is being brought up as. There's lots of theories out there. I can't say that I subscribe to one or the other. Dr. Jody Wood is somebody I really respect. Engineering school at Clemson is top notch. That's my alma mater. So I guess like there's a feeling of trust there. But I mean, think about that. I'm not gonna speculate. I'm just gonna ask people, especially those with a scientific mind that understand and know physics. I mean, think about whether that's actually possible.
I have some problems with physics as a chemist, and I like to believe in the concept I call cartoon physics. And cartoon physics is what allows the Roadrunner to stand over the cliff while Wile E. Coyote is falling down. And my question is, if Bugs Bunny walked off the cliff, would he stand there with the Roadrunner or would he fall with the coyote?
Dr. Lenny, is that a trick question?
No, but it depends on your belief. And to tell you the truth, I would totally believe that Bugs Bunny would stay up there with the Roadrunner because Bugs Bunny knows how to use imagination. And if he doesn't believe he's going to fall, he's not going to fall. But you have to have the confidence to step off that cliff and still remain standing in order to join those two characters. And that's the concept of cartoon physics. So if you can imagine it and explain it, even if it doesn't make sense in real physics, it's allowed to be a concept until we can explain it. And by allowing cartoon physics, it gives us a world of greater than physics, things that physics disallows but can obviously be true. And so the gnomes and the fairies all play in the world of cartoon physics. And as soon as you believe in cartoon physics, they make their appearances and they're part of your world.
Well, and so what I guess I'm pointing out here is, again, just like Building 7, obviously there's all these windows that are blown out in floors that are below the point of impact. And whatever energy was inside the building is forceful enough to blow a body part so that it's not just, it doesn't just blow and hit it and fall gravity to the ground. It blows out and fuses to the structure. To me, like, I would want to know more information about that from Dr. Judy Wood. So at any rate, moving on with some of the things. And you know that many people, many first responders talked about how when it was hit, the bottom floor of the World Trade Center, like every window was busted out, and there were people actually there already with third-degree burns. One gentleman died, and his father, who's based in Philadelphia, is a huge family activist about getting the truth. And the 9/11 Commission report, all they could tell him was that your son died from a fireball that came down an elevator shaft. Well, there's lots of scientists, engineers that and firefighters that talk about the unlikelihood that if the story unfolded how it did, that that doesn't even make sense. That fuel went down an iron shaft and created fire that just created a fireball and burned this many people that happened to be in the lobby at the time of impact. It's just.
But I saw it in a Bruce Willis movie. Doesn't it have to work that way?
Yeah, if Hollywood says so.
I mean, that's the world we live in, is if Hollywood says so, they'll believe it.
Yeah.
But there's so much from the eyewitness viewpoint, and I had never heard that about the fusing of the shape of the limb to a building across the street. Just think of the force that would have had to be taken to mash the atoms into each other. Yeah, there's something that blew with exceptional force from inside the structure, not outside. But to tell you the truth, I've been so far away from putting my brain onto this topic that I think there's a fresh perspective to be viewed on the whole episode. as soon as the political information on what really was suppressed comes out, because from my work in the chemtrails area, I have learned that what I believe as the science and what people believe as the truth are two completely different concepts. And I'm not going to change the science to allow people to believe their own truth, and they're not going to allow their own truth to believe in the science. And so it's like putting your fingers in your ears and screaming la 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 la, because you don't want to come to the realization that you've been wrong for a long time, and that you have to go all the way and remove the embeddedness of the wrong. And that's just part of the opening the Schrodinger's cat box. But occasionally that box is Pandora's box and a lot more shit comes out. Go ahead.
Well, let me put this into your ear, Lenny. So as I go through my journal here, and again, we're weighing what we knew and looking for new ways of looking at the information. So, all right. Again, one of the things that was very pronounced in the flashbacks of these people working on scene was the bodies jumping out of the window, and that they cracked like eggs when they hit, that kind of thing. One firefighter talked about when he was responding to go in to, do his duty. He said that he had to time his building he had to time his entrance into the building such that it was in between jumpers, so that he would not get hit by basically a falling body. What's interesting is those bodies that jumped from high above, they weren't fused into the ground that they landed on.
Right.
Okay, so just food for thought. Again, I'm not a scientist. I am just simply going through my journal 17 years later and looking at things that I wrote and see, is there anything in here to weigh differently? That's all.
Yes.
So the other thing that I think is interesting, the staircases that they turned over and they actually found bodies, those bodies were intact. So, okay, well, you've got some bodies that had parts blown out into nearby structures and fusing. I'm just reading. This was just journal documenting what I was told, basically to process everything that I was listening to all day. But then you've got like an entire building that collapsed on top of human beings, and their bodies are fully intact. To me, that's an anomaly. I mean, granted, they might have been like somewhat protected in pockets, like within the staircase. I'm not really sure. But again, this is something that I would love for an expert to,
The first thing that I would think about is we need to do a theoretical temperature analysis on the human body, something called a thermal gravimetric analysis, so that we know, for instance, that as you heat the body, the blood would boil off at one point, and different things would happen in the physiology, so that to get it all the way to the point where the atoms could be pressed together, all the water's gone, most of the elements are gone if they're volatilized. So things like carbon and sulfur are gone because you just make sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide in the temperatures. But the things that would stay are the metals, the calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium ions, but they would all have to be at certain temperatures. The ions go back to metals, and that the electrons have to come from somewhere. So the chemistry involved would be something that the profile of what the TGA analysis would give would be able to tell you at least the temperature of what was going on, and we'll assume that a nuclear explosion at the point where it set off, a detonation, would be a lot hotter right at the site when it first went off than what it would have to pass through. So if the stairwells were pockets where people collected when they thought they could get out and then there was stairwell missing or something, so they couldn't go back and they couldn't go forward, that at least explains why they're gathered there in the stairwell. Now, how things came down in physics, to my knowledge, was that it was free fall. And the free fall tells me that no matter what hit the side of the building, it was a controlled demolition, which means the buildings were already wired for blowing, and they fell right down in their own footprint. How wide an area did it cover of blocks of New York City for how it fell versus if a tower would have leaned over and keeled over and fell sideways when something hit it?
Well, yeah. Well, and here's another thing, and I don't know exactly where my journal it is. This notebook is filled. But there was a person, a firefighter, who said when the plane hit, he was in the lobby, and it was as if the entire midsection of the World Trade Center was hollowed out because all of this debris from the above floors just fell like right in the center. And that's something that I would love, further scientific expert look at. And again, at the time, it's just like, oh, this is what happens when a plane hits. But then when you really start breaking it down and say, really, how did the building hollow out such that fireballs came down elevator shafts and, general office place debris and stuff just all came crashing down in the middle. And, just the jeopardy of put the firefighters, because they go through all of this training, and a lot of what they're explaining here is stuff that they don't see in every fire scene. And for people that are experienced and running into, high-rise burning buildings, be it office, apartment buildings, these are all anomalies. And so many talking about, it wasn't just their visions, a lot of their, and this is very normal, like when you, in trauma, it's our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we smell. Those are all things that are very, very, very vivid. I know for myself, every September, when the sky is as blue and the temperature is like how it was at the time, it's all very triggering. So for them, another big sensory factor was hearing sequences of booms, like
Yes.
going off, like firecrackers. And again, that doesn't fit. I mean, you compare and contrast, well, in your whole history of 24 years working in the fire department, have you ever gone into a burning building where you heard firecracker, like crack, 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 crack? No, but at the time, my role is just to be where they are. And obviously, many people are trying to make sense of these things and these initial thoughts that were captured from that day. But at the time, who would have thought to put two and two together? But they're very clear about what they heard. Because when a traumatic event happens, it literally brands itself. Like if you were to take a branding on my skin, fire branding, it just singes into your brain. Okay? And while other things, like let's say you start a new job and you drive from point A to point B, and it takes a couple days to get the lay of the land, and it takes a little time. You have to go through that same pathway to work for several days before it's automatic and natural to you. When a trauma happens, it's so significant, and it hits our psyche with such a force that the neuro pathway that is created completely bypasses the normal filing system. And it is so clear and it is so vivid. And to question anybody about what they heard, what they saw, what they smelled that day is just a travesty. Oh, you were just hearing things, or you thought you heard things. No. They know what they heard. That's something they will never, ever forget. It's that clear. Even the smell of the air is something that will forever be very vivid in the traumatized brain. And this is the case for all traumas. So, it really makes me unhappy when people try to discredit or dismiss what these people that ran into a burning building. I mean, are you kidding me? And none of them like to be called heroes. A lot of them were uncomfortable with the attention they were getting. They're just doing their job. But for God's sake, do not deny my reality of what I saw, what I heard. I know what I heard. I know that this is different than any fire that I've ever worked on or was dispatched to in the whole history.
Right. And yet the official story totally disrespects those workers on a human scale and would rather believe something that they could make into their own logical twisted sense to justify an extremism that 17 years later we're still not at the bottom of, but we're also only 55 years past the Kennedy assassination, and we're not at the bottom of that one either. And so the idea of what's going on has the possibility of multiple realities, and that the level of reality that we're caught in during a situation is not the level of reality that most people are at rest. And the attention that you have to provide during a trauma is so focused that everything is magnified and you physically slow time down. So that during the time that somebody's on a 12-hour shift, it almost feels like they've been there for a year, because everything has multiplied in magnitude that the seconds take hours because of the way it is. And you get addicted to it, adrenaline to what's going on. And when you're in the movie and the movie is happening in real time, all of a sudden hours are gone and it only seemed like minutes. And Hollywood has put images in people's minds that they used to get by reading books. The books took a lot of depth to understand, and the intelligence of reading the book and understanding what was going on put a lot of people in their fields and professions because they read about something they wanted to understand, and so they rolled up their sleeves and understood it. And nowadays, everybody's seen so much by the time they're a teenager that there's no real novelty anymore, and what you see is what you get has become the thing. And as you get deeper into anything, you learn that it's not at all what you were taught, and there's so much advantage to taking advantage of people who don't know something that you almost have to know a little bit of everything just to protect yourself from all the con men and the jokers that might be out there. But that's a very extreme vision of how the society works. Unfortunately, it's the extreme vision that's been taught by Hollywood. And so...
Yeah. Well, and on that note, I would love, if you don't mind, I would love to give a couple of vignettes before the show's over.
Please do.
Like the endearing side of humanity. As I told you, firefighters in general were uncomfortable with the level of attention they were getting and being lauded as heroes when anyone that you would talk to would say, I'm just doing my job. I talked to one firefighter who said, I remember walking up the stairs and there was a businessman who was holding his suit jacket behind him. And he keeping everybody in the stairwell calm. He goes, that's my hero. Likewise, I spoke to another firefighter who talked about, I'm not a hero. He said, this is my job. I signed up for this. These people that worked in the building, they never signed up for this. They never had training. He said, but we passed out extra helmets and jackets. And he said, businessmen worked all day side by side with them. And he goes, those people right there, they're my heroes. And I just, that just makes me want to cry because I'm like, well, I'm going to disagree. You are a hero. But at the same time, the fact that you appreciated the civilian response instead of just, oh, I'm at safety. No, I'm in this with you, man. Whatever I can do. People felt so powerless, and a local elementary school, they made little brown bags with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And literally after, they didn't have this makeshift oasis set up right away.
Right.
And literally after eating pretty much nothing for 2 days straight, I remember the fireman saying, he's like, oh man, when I got that brown bag lunch, he's like, that was the best fucking sandwich I ever had, like in that New York style accent. And it was like, in a small part, these kids were doing their bit. It was very, very, very sweet, And so, naturally, as an ER social worker, I went to the most local trauma level 1 hospital, St. Vincent's ER, and connected with the social worker that was in duty on that day. She's actually originally from England. But she said they were all prepared and were ready for an influx of people, but they didn't get anybody. And one of the nurses at the emergency room said, these people might not have ever made it to the emergency room for me to take care of them today, but the makeshift wall of missing posters that were all plastered outside of St. Vincent Hospital, she said, I might not have been able to take care of them, but I can take care of their wall. And she made it a point every day, even on her days off, to make sure that any, coffee cups, any kind of garbage or anything that was thrown down, or something fell down from tape, she would use the adhesive and reattach it. It was so beautiful that symbolically she was taking care of them by taking care of their wall. And to me, it's just, that's a great thing. Now, one of my duties, my shift was 4 to midnight, and every mental health worker had 1 hour of work per day going through mail, because we had to pick out what was appropriate and not appropriate for putting out on the table so that the first responders, including not just firemen, but police officers, people that had skill, craft trade to cut up iron and steel, transportation people, all kinds of people, National Guard. And some of the best things that were mailed into the firefighters was stuff written by kids. And there was one that I came across. I was like, oh my God, this is adorable. Kid wrote, my dad's a doctor. He tried to volunteer, but they said they didn't need any more volunteers. So he went fishing. And I was like, this is adorable. And he drew a picture of his dad with a stethoscope sitting by, fishing. And I said, this is going to really cheer up somebody. He put it on. Then there were other people that, especially because you think back to all that media coverage, there are people one of the ones, I didn't open it, my team lead opened it. And she's like, you guys, listen to this one. And it's like, how does it feel to be a hero? I've never won anything in my life. I've never gotten a ribbon. I've never gotten a trophy. So I guess you guys feel pretty good about now. And she's like, okay, this is a taker-outer. And I was like, oh my gosh. But our media coverage is driving this kind of response from the general public,
Yeah. And the general public really believes in the media so much that the new way media that we are developing now is going to be crucial to people taking the reins for themselves and putting it out there. So I want to remind folks with 10 minutes left that they're listening to The New Way. We're on Steempunk Radio, which can be found at steempunkradio.com. It can also be found on the TuneIn app. And I'm talking with Karen, the social worker, and she can be found on Twitter at KW0. That's 0 as in the number 0 instead of the letter O, RKER. So it's K worker with the O changed to a 0, and that's on Twitter. And you can actually find me on Twitter at Lenny Thyme, but I do not recall the last time I was actually on Twitter. But I'm going to get on Twitter today to go hook up with Karen so that I can actually see some of the pictures she's talking about posting. I think that you can find me best on steemit.com at Lenny Thyme, and there I have a blog called No Way, where I say no way to almost everything that comes my way, and I write crypto fiction, which is my way of telling the truth in such a way that if I embellish the truth a little bit in order to make it a better story, that's allowable. But if I change the truth to make it a fiction, then the pathway that I introduce must include fictional characters and people from history who are not the reality, but speaking from their own perspective. And now, Karen, tell everyone where you can be found beyond Twitter, or again, reinforce the Twitter.
I just want to reinforce the Twitter. That's my primary platform mechanism for communicating. And it's handler K worker, as in Karen, the social worker. K worker, and the O is actually a 0. It's not an O. So, I'll be posting pictures today and also links to some videos. I mentioned Dr. Judy with several times today. I will post a couple of those videos that I have come to, what do you want to call it, strongly believe in or find extremely credible based on, and saving you the legwork of the hours and hours of research that I did, that after so much hours of discerning and controlling for opposition and fact-checking and verifying, there's about 3 to 5 videos that I have come to implicitly trust. You can find my posts. It'll be intermittent throughout the day in honor of this day of tragedy that I hope, I guess they're calling it Patriot Day now, but I hope that we can take a tragedy and really embrace, opening our minds to the possibilities. I'm not saying that you have to believe. I would never impose or push the results of my research on anybody, but just opening our minds in hopes that in situations of foul play, when we get to the truth and we hold those responsible, we make them accountable. It's hopeful that our trajectory for the future will hopefully be a more transparent one, a more honest one, and tragedy will continue in all types of forms, but it's important. Humanity, and I said I wasn't going to cry today.
That's okay. You're allowed to cry. The frequency that we resonate at is one that has to be held to as high a standard as we can take our resonant frequency. And that means doing what's good and right, and you're doing what's good and right, and so we're with you. And remembering folks is important.
Not just remembering them, but valuing their worth.
And not...
I cannot tell you how many really good people, just really just salt of the earth good people, and just have their minds played with. I don't care if my mind's played with. I figured it out, whatever, but I can't imagine what it's like for the families, friends, and oh God, the whole fireman brotherhood, and the ongoing, like, there's still harm. There's now 10,000 confirmed cases of cancer from first responders, and my heart aches for them because I just really care for people.
And the empathy that we have for people will continue through us, through our work, which is to heal. But it's not necessarily medical healing. It's not necessarily socially healing. It's spiritual healing. And reaching a level where we can develop the trust in ourselves to make a difference so that this sort of thing cannot happen again. And there's a telling feature in every society that brings about these sort of things. And if we're going to watch it happen, let's make sure we keep it on a perspective of human scale and not get forced as humans to believe in the nonsense put forth by countries when the players called countries are really people who are covering their own ass and need to be held responsible for their actions. And so what we're going to do is focus on seeing the mechanisms that we've been given and evaluate whether those mechanisms are worth keeping or worth replacing in terms of what we know. For instance, a gasoline-driven economy that runs on cars in every individual home in America is not going to work into the future because we've reached peak oil and the gasoline prices are only going to go up from here. But the American system is built on 25% of the world economy, and the American population is hardly 25%. So when we're talking about equity and value, the system that we've been brought under is no longer, but the new system that we're moving to is up to us to create. And there's many different people who are creators on human scale who, if they're listening, can start working and sharing ideas with each other and start bringing those ideas to our knowledge point so that we can work with you on ideas, and anybody's idea is welcome. We're not going to contest who's bringing an idea, and we're not going to argue about right or wrong. We're going to pursue the ramifications of the idea and then run it through the flux boxes and see if it can replace some of those ideas that we know are wrong, but we have to use because there's no alternative, because we've been presented a one-size-fits-all system.
Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lenny, for having me on today, and specifically allowing me to just reflect on my story, which is just one of, kind of like a outside observer of what I saw, and sharing just parts of my journal and giving me the opportunity to share it with other people. I'm interested to know if any of the things that I wrote about and recorded from those years, what is your new way of thinking about those things? Things like, a hollowed out World Trade Center with all this debris coming out down or whatever. It'll be interesting to see what input other people have, because it really does take a collective minds from multiple perspectives to figure things out, and I just really appreciate that you gave me a platform. This is the first for me. After 17 years, the first time I've looked at my journal writings and looked at it and weighed it in a new way. Instead of just remembering it, I was actually focusing on, this is what I knew then, but if I weigh it differently, what do I know now? So that's been a real thrill to have that opportunity. So thank you, Dr. Lenny.
You're welcome, Karen, and I'm sure we will be continuing with conversations on into the future. The way that things work and the way that things have been presented to work are not necessarily correlated. And it is incumbent on us that we each take the time to go backwards into our own frame of reference and see if some of our actions might not have been taken place off of time. And what I mean by that is that we've gone on a surreal adventure, a vision quest, or some episode in which it takes us to a reality where time physically stops in real terms of humanity, and then shifts us out into a different experience, allows us to experience it, and then brings us back into humanity. Okay, we're done. And we're done 20 seconds before I expected to be done. All right.
Sigh of relief.
That was great, Karen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I enjoyed the conversation and the depth that we were looking at.